Hello, everyone. I'm getting everyone admitted right now, so we're going to wait just a second here. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. We are so excited to be able to talk about the election with you all. I know we're going to have a few more folks rolling in. So as we have more participants rolling in, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about who Grade Ed is, and we're going to go through a quick introduction, just because we have not been able to do that in a while, and you all probably want to know who it is that's behind the work that we're going to be launching towards in the next year. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to our Director of Communications, Annalise Harris, and she's going to kick off our staff introductions. Annalise, I'll kick it to you. Oh, Annalise, we can't hear you.
Hey, so my name's Annalise Harris. I am the comms and social media director for Grade Ed Colorado, and I started in what I would say is March Madness in the middle of COVID and the economic shutdown. So it's been a really great experience virtually, and I have enjoyed my own growth in the past 8 months. Is it March, April, May, June, July? You can't even count. You don't even know how long it is. It feels like 2 years, but it hasn't even been a full year. So anyway, it's been really a lot of ups and downs, and I'm really grateful for the team that has supported me and welcomed me and allowed for some creative freedoms and a lot of support. I have been part of the campaigns and then pushed, some things that I came up with and really have enjoyed meeting the supporters and, all the way down to getting signatures for 271. So it's been a wild ride, and 2020 just doesn't seem to end. But I'm glad that we can at least debrief and reflect on all of the efforts that we really have put together towards public education voter and supporting the mission and vision of Grade Ed Colorado.
Hi, my name is Ben Robinson. I'm the Communications and Public Affairs Coordinator. So usually in non-COVID times, I split my time between the office and the Capitol, do a lot of our email writing, and then I also represent our interests at the legislature. I've been with Grade Ed for about a year now. It's actually a little bit longer if you count my time here as a contract employee on Prop CC. That's how I got started. But I really like the opportunity to be able to work on stuff that school wasn't the easiest for me. So it's nice to be able to work for students who are struggling and better prepare them for their futures.
Thanks, Ben. I am Betsy Bevis. I'm our Director of Outreach and Public Affairs. I am the one whose name you see on most emails, and you're probably thinking, gosh, she sure emails me a lot. I wish she would stop. But I'm actually also, unfortunately, transitioning out of Grade Ed and moving on to move closer to some family. So this might be my last big event of my time at Grade Ed, and I will miss this all so much, but I can't wait to see what you all have in store for your next organizing director.
Thanks, Betsy. We will miss you. And so hello, everyone. My name is Lee Steed, and I am the Director of Equity Matters. And I have been with Grade Ed, I want to say 5, probably 6 years. My first year, I started as a volunteer and was asked to give a presentation. And so it was right in the middle of my daughter and her transitioning to 6th grade. So you know what that was like. Tears, drama, and that's just me. So not even talking about her. But anyway, so I was asked like a year later to join Great Ed's team on a part-time basis, and just loved the work. Did not realize that we were really struggling as a state, and not even tapped into what the nation was going through. And so when I got more information, I got much more passionate about the work, and that's when I was asked to come on as a full-time employee. I could not have said no to that. It just made sense for my life at that time. So I have enjoyed doing the work. My outreach includes reaching out to students, which students are a powerhouse in our world, and so they really brought a lot of perspective to our work. I also was able to reach out to different communities, different organizations, and different individuals. So this is what Great Ed has given me that opportunity to do, and has made me the better parent, and a much more informed voter, and a community member. So thank you all for joining us this evening.
I'm Lisa Weil. I'm the executive director of Great Education Colorado. I was one of the founders of the organization back when I had no gray hair and my college graduate was in pre-K. It is my honor and pleasure to get to work with this incredible group of people. And yes, Betsy, we're going to miss you a lot. But it has, seeing this team pull together, stay together, and get creative during this incredibly difficult time, and maintaining their passion for the mission of adequate and equitable funding of our schools is an inspiration. It keeps me going. And I thank you all for being here today.
Hi there, I'm Nicole Niebler. I'm Great Ed's Director of Operations. I started with Great Ed just about 2 years ago. I do a lot of the back end stuff that a lot of people don't see, but I am really passionate about our mission and vision for this organization, and hope that all of my back end work can help make funding more adequately and equitably funded in Colorado.
And with my name starting with a Z, I always go last. My name is Zachary Tardif. I'm the Director of Development at Great Ed. I've been with Great Ed now for about 4 years. And my entire professional career has been spent in public education, most of it in higher ed, but now for the last few years with Great Ed.
So thank you to the staff. We are missing Mary McNeil Cheever, who has been with us for almost all of the 17 years on and off. Who is sort of our utility infielder and is just a remarkable addition to this organization. So I'm gonna sort of set the big picture of how we're taking a look at the election and what happened. The headline, I think, when you look at the public education voter slate we did and how votes happened all across the state, is that Colorado voters support public education. It was actually a very positive, more positive year for public education than it's been for a long time, with the passage of B and EE and mill levies across the state. Betsy's going to go more in depth into all of that. We've heard a lot of people saying we're trying to figure out what was the big message that the voters were sending. It seemed confused that we supported B and EE, which had to do with taxes, and at the same time supported 116 and 117, which took money away and made things more difficult for the legislature to invest more, sort of strengthen Tabor. And one thing that I think is important to note in considering all that is that the voters only get to vote on what's put in front of them. And it's not put together as a package. It's just one issue after another. We are sorry it is unfortunate that all the curveballs that COVID sent us, we weren't able to put 271 on the ballot. I think this was the right year to do that, and we had incredible support. But the electorate didn't get a chance to weigh in on that. What that tells us is that we have to keep working on the big picture policy scale of putting things on the ballot and getting people ready for that and building the infrastructure. And even though we didn't get 271 on the ballot, we did build more infrastructure. We have more people who understand what the issues are in fiscal Colorado and how to take action. We're always building. We're lose forward. We're looking forward to winning, and we did get to win on a couple issues this year. When you look at 116, we weren't able to make that connection enough between a tax cut and the impact it was going to have on schools. We didn't have the funding to do that. And so it may be inconsistent, but for voters who are looking at each one separately, not surprising. What it tells us is that we need to keep informing and educating and engaging and empowering people in between the elections. We can't wait for an election and then try to tell people about what a fair tax system looks like and what adequate and equitable funding looks like. And that's why we're so grateful to so many of you who are on this call today, who are our advocates, who are talking to your friends, who were gathering petitions and or signatures and informing people of that, who have us come and speak to your PTA or your organizations or our partners at the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition. We're continuing to get that information out. We cannot stop, and you'll hear at the end of the discussion today how you can be a part of ensuring that the infrastructure and the knowledge base is there for the next time that we need to go to the ballot. We passed some Band-Aids that have bought us some time and some breathing room. It's to bridge. Because B passed, because EE passed, we won't have rural schools closing next year, which may well have happened if neither of those things had happened. So the legislature has some more tools now. We have the breathing room, but we have to keep working until we get to that place when we have the ballot measure that is going to get over the finish line and really make Colorado a state where we invest in our schools and make sure that every student, no matter where they live, how they learn, the color of the skin, or the language spoken at home, that every student graduates ready to lead their best life. So with that sort of bigger picture, I'm going to kick it back to Betsy to talk about what actually happened. I skipped over the volunteers, didn't I? We got to go back a phrase. I was so excited.
Yeah, we're gonna real quick go. I'm going to let Ben talk a little bit about what our volunteers were able to do this year.
Oops.
Well, I won't take too much time here, but we have some pretty cool stats to share. As you can see at the top, we contacted over 500,000 voters. That's a dedicated group of volunteers and this staff. And that was via text. And we really think that probably helped move the needle, especially for Amendment B. We went after that pretty hard. We had 27 digital organizers, which was great. Digital organizer is basically somebody who signed up through an app with us, which I will talk about later. And they received actions every week, like emailing their friends and family, texting friends and family, posting to social media, to really just spread awareness about our public education voter slate to Coloradans across the state. We had 101 public education voter pledges. That goes very much into our volunteers. We had a lot of people pledge to vote a certain way, and then also sign up to text or to sign up to organize digitally for us. And then this last little stat here is the number of signatures we gathered for 271, which obviously didn't make it on the ballot, but I think it's a testament to the creativity and the grit of our volunteers that we got almost 50,000 signatures in the midst of a pandemic when we had to start about 2 months late. And I think that anybody who participated in that effort should pat themselves on the back and have hope for the future, because we now know innovative ways to gather signatures when we can't do so traditionally. And we also know that Coloradans are ready for a fair tax.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. And I know that a lot of the signature gatherers and texters and digital advocates and organizers are on this call today. So thank you all personally for doing the work that you have done for us over the past few months and that you've done for schools across Colorado. So I'm going to now walk through just specifically what it means for each measure that passed or did not pass that was on our public education voter ballot. I'm going to go through some specifics at the end of each measure. I'm going to pause for questions. You can go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and we'll have Zach and Ben moderating, making sure that all of your questions get answered in case we miss something that you all would like to hear about tonight. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about Prop 116. For those of you that are not entrenched in this and maybe don't remember all of the numbers perfectly, Prop 116 was the measure that would decrease the flat tax in Colorado from 4.63% to 4.55%. This did pass in Colorado. What this means for Colorado essentially is that there will be a huge loss of revenue, a projected 150 million or so for schools in the coming years. In a time when we already were having to cut millions of dollars over the past year just to COVID economic downturn for our schools, and we already had an underfunded school system, this is going to be a pretty big blow to our education funding. Essentially what this means is that the wealthiest will benefit the most from a tax break, and the average Coloradan will save about 77 cents per week, an average of $40 a year. The need for a fair tax is greater than ever before, especially because this measure passed. And it shows that we really do have our work cut out for us in Colorado. One of the chat questions that just came through is who supported and funded 116. 116 was supported and funded by Colorado Rising Action, Independence Institute, organizations like that. It was opposed by Great Ed, Fair Tax Colorado, Colorado Fiscal Institute, Bell Policy Center, and a slew of other organizations that were on the opposition side that just want to see more revenue and better public services for our state. Are there any other questions? I know Prop 116 was pretty straightforward, but if there are any questions about Prop 116, feel free to throw those in the chat. Okay. Well, if anyone thinks of any questions as we move forward, feel free. Why could 116 get signatures when we couldn't? That is a great question. And what it comes down to is lots of money. Unfortunately, there were millions of dollars were put behind the signature gathering effort for 116, whereas Fair Tax Colorado and 271 did tend to move forward in a grassroots fashion, as we tend to do. And normally that would be a lot of hard work, but we could do it. And during a pandemic, we had our work cut out for us, even with Great Ed's advocates gathering 45,000 signatures on their own, still not quite enough to get us over the finish line. Okay. Other questions?
Betsy, is that a $150 million in annual loss?
That's the projected for this coming year. Obviously, that will fluctuate some based on the economy and how things are going, but that's the kind of estimate that we have as of right now for an annual loss.
Betsy, another one of the questions was, what year does this tax decrease begin?
This will begin in 2021. So the next taxable year will fall under this new tax rate. Let's see.
Why did Polis support the measure?
That's a great question. He does support education. He thought that this was one of the things that Governor Polis has always focused on is he has been pretty public about his desire for a tax cut. And so he did not necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, he never came out as being fully in support of this. He never endorsed it, though he did make some remarks that lended themselves towards being more supportive than not. He never came out in an endorsement with this measure. So there is that, but yeah, there is the component that he has always been a little bit more focused on the tax cut side of things. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. It looks like that was all of the questions. Thank you to our moderators, Ben and Zach. Okay, Prop 117. For those of you that don't remember what Prop 117 was, this was the measure that would make it to where essentially our fees, any fees or enterprise fees that would be normally able to be passed by the legislature would actually have to go to a vote of the people, much like we do already with our income tax, any income tax increase. And so this did pass at the state level. So essentially what this means is that the legislature does have to go, or it can be a citizens initiative that has to go to the vote of the people before we can put any new tax on or any new fee on enterprises. So that's essentially the gist of the measure. Because this passed, this really eliminates the ability of the legislature to get creative with new tools to raise revenue. One of the ways that they've been able to get creative with raising revenue is through making sure that they, for example, Prop DD last year was a fee on essentially sports betting that would go towards water. So that would be something that the legislature would have to make sure to refer to the ballot, things like that. So when we need one of the big consequences to Prop 117 is that when we need the legislature to get creative with how they're able to raise revenue, because we are in this economic downturn because of COVID, we've blocked another avenue. Obviously, it is not an ideal way to raise funds for essential services, but it was one way. If there are any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. And other than that, I will go ahead and move on. If anyone has any other questions about Prop 117, feel free to throw those in as well. Okay. And thank you, Rep. Snyder. Actually, it applies only to new enterprises projected to raise 100 million over 5 years. Yes, that is the more specific point of that. So it does only apply to certain enterprises, but ones that are a little bit more significant, which would be a significant change in revenue and what we're able to bring in for essential services. So Amendment B is what we've got next up. And Amendment B is something that Great Ed was in support of. We were excited to be able to text for Amendment B and do lots of other advocacy to try and get this passed. We were so excited that it did pass. Essentially what this did is this said, we are going to stop digging ourselves into even more of a hole with funneling additional dollars out at the bottom through local property taxes, and we're going to freeze the ratio, or essentially repeal the part of the ratio in Gallagher that maintains that 45 to 55 ratio for residential and commercial property taxes, so that we could prevent further cuts from happening on a local level. So because we were able to pass this, this will freeze that. It will prevent further cuts from happening at the local level. It will not generate any new revenue immediately, though it will eventually as property values rise, we will see some additional revenue on the local level. So that is really exciting. This doesn't solve all of our education funding woes, but it is a push forward in the right direction. And for those of you that are familiar with the term Gallagher Amendment, this is helping us to solve some of the problems of the Gallagher Amendment and what that has caused at our state and local level for funding. Let's see, we've got a question from Martha. This applies to all measures, but have analyses been done on all of these regarding counties, districts that supported and by how much? Important to know for future efforts. That is a great question, Martha. Lisa, do you have any indication on that?
I don't at the moment. I was just writing a response that is something that I hope happens. And I think we can take a look at some things. I know Bernie Busher is on the call today and he was the chair. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie, but I do know that Amendment B passed in El Paso, or I believe it did. So that analysis should be pretty interesting.
It did pass in El Paso and it will be very interesting. I've seen some preliminary analysis by districts, but there's a good bit of work to be done. Our friend Carrie Kennedy, I know, has done some work in that area.
As we learn of that, we can pass that along to folks who please stay connected so we can keep doing that.
Yeah. Let's see, we've got a question from Nora Brown, president of Colorado PTA. What is projection for property taxes as a result of COVID? Markets have been strong even through this, right? That is another great question. I am not sure that I know enough to confidently answer that. I do think that markets have still been strong, so there is an opportunity to potentially increase some revenue moving forward, but I am not an expert on how our markets and property taxes have been unfolding throughout all this. So Lisa or any other experts on that, if you have anything more to say to that.
Well, that does get to the reason why it was so critical that Amendment B passed, because that ratio would have shoved the residential assessment rate down so far to the tune of $350 to $500 million that we would have lost. Because not only was the residential markets stabilized and even rising, the non-residential value of non-residential property has plummeted because of COVID. Bernie, do you have anything to add to that?
Lisa, I know that Joanne Groff did projections a number of months ago, and statewide, she projected that residential values would increase about 10%, but the all other category would decrease perhaps as much as 30 to 40%, resulting in an 18% decrease in the residential assessment rate if Amendment B had not passed. So it depends on district by district analysis, but those districts that have a lot of commercial property are likely to see still some pretty major hits in their revenues.
Great. Thank you so much. That's super helpful information. Okay, we are going to move on to our last measure that we had on our public education voter slate, Proposition EE, which we did support. It was the measure that would implement a new tax on vaping products, as Colorado did not before that have a tax on vaping products, and increase taxes on cigarette and nicotine products. That funding, because this passed, that funding will go towards generating revenue for rural schools over the next 3 years, which we are very excited to see additional dollars going towards our rural schools that so desperately need it. And then after those 3 years, early childhood education will see an increase in funding due to the revenue from this new tax. This will not solve our funding woes. We want to make it very clear. I think all of you, if you've lived in Colorado and been involved in education funding for any amount of time, you've probably heard, but what about the marijuana money? We do not want this to become another marijuana money situation. while this is a huge step forward for our rural schools, for early childhood education, for relieving the state budget some when we are in a place where we need as much relief as possible to get us into a better spot with our public education funding. This still will not make sure that we are even at an average place when it comes to in comparison to the rest of the country for education funding. So we want to make that super clear that while we are excited this is something that passed and will increase revenue for schools, it doesn't even get us close to what we need to be. Over the next 3 years, we're anticipating about $90 million for rural schools. And just as for context, we had a $300 million cut this past year to education. So we really have a long way to go, but we're super excited that we are not quite as far behind as we were.
Betsy, real quick, if we could dive into this. Since Polis has achieved his campaign promises to lower taxes and fund early childhood ed, do we think he will energetically support a ballot initiative to raise revenue for education?
I love the enthusiasm there, Robin. You know, I can't say that I can be confident in either way. I think that based on speculation, it does not seem like that would be a place where Polis would be able to get in the next couple of years. But I think we'll just have to keep at it and keep trying and talk with our legislators and send letters to Polis, and hopefully we can get him there. So
how will we answer the folks who are wondering why we don't have universal preschool next year?
That is a great question, Sally. Lisa, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The answer is probably politics to get it out of the Capitol. That may not, this is the answer. I don't know if this is what you tell people, but in order to ensure that there was support to put it on the ballot, I think there was a lot of concern about what's happening in rural schools. This will put $90 million over 3 years. I think 25, 30, and 35 million into rural schools. So that was really important to a lot of the legislators, I think, to know to sort of prevent real frightening cuts to rural schools and have them close. And in addition, there is concern about the negative factor that grew, or the BS factor, I'm sorry, it's the budget stabilization factor, which conveniently is the BS factor, grew from $572 million to like $1.2 billion in the budget. And so there was some interest in putting some money into some of that funding into the state education fund, which is part of what I was saying is that bridge, that sort of breathing room we have so that the entire public education funding system isn't collapsing, putting some of that money in. And that's why there was those 3 years. And I would also say that there is some benefit to giving some time to put that in place. You can't go from not universal early childhood to universal childhood. So there is some planning time that I think will be well spent. But that's how it was written, to refer it out to the voters.
And then we have, will this go to all grades in rural schools or just to early childhood?
Great question. The rural schools money is just going to go to rural schools. This is actually, it's been 2 or 3 years that the legislature has recognized that the BS factor actually hurts rural schools more than the rest of the schools. And so they have tried to find one-time dollars, and they've done one-time dollars 3 times to just help their budgets. So the rural schools can use that money in any way they want. And they have a lot of different reasons and things to be spending that money on.
Awesome. These are great questions. Thank you all for engaging and asking them. Okay. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit. We're going to move down from the state level to the local level and talk about what passed as far as local mill levies. So some of these there were lots of different issues that were put on the ballot on the local level, mill levies, best matching bonds, etc. Only 3 districts didn't pass their mill levies and or best matches or bonds, Gilpin County, Rocky Ford, and Strasburg 31J. Out of all of the, I believe it was 34 districts that went, only 3 were able to not pass. And so this is a really, really exciting thing that shows that Coloradans across the state really do care about education funding and are willing to increase their property taxes to make sure that their schools are funded, especially on the local level. So that's really good information for us to move forward and know that Coloradans care, and they will show up to vote for increasing funding for public schools. The only issue with these local mill levies is that while this is good for funding overall, this does exacerbate the inequities amongst districts. So say, for example, Greeley was able to pass a mill levy for the first time ever just a couple of years ago. And while Denver has been able to pass quite a few over the years. So if there are districts that aren't able to pass those mill levies, then that just adds to some of the inequity of, okay, we really need to get a statewide fix. This really can't be a fix of which district is able to raise more revenue and which is not. So that does exacerbate some of those inequities. And that's why we're really focused on finding a statewide solution and not relying on local level solutions to help the state with our statewide funding issue. Okay, and I am going to go ahead and pass it off to Lisa, and she's going to talk a little bit about the legislative session and what is next. Had some big news just today come out, so.
That's right. And that big news is the special session that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks in order to support programs that will help, well, we'll see what what exactly is going to be entailed, but a lot of it is for stimulus to give folks who have lost their jobs more funding to tide them over until hopefully there's a federal stimulus package again. We will, I know the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition, which is the coalition that brought Amendment 73 forward 2 years ago, is going to be calling on making sure that education can be a part of that package, because if schools can't stay safe and open, it's hard for folks to work. So I'm going to talk more farther down the line. The first thing is sort of school finance and how do we get that budget stabilization factor from the $1.2 billion that it sits at right now back down to the budget stabilization factor. Quite simply is a measure of how far behind we are when adjusting for inflation and the growth in the number of students from before the Great Recession, basically. So we had built ourselves back to $572 million behind. It had been $1.1 billion back in probably 2013-14, and we were slowly getting back up to where we were back in 2008, and we plunged right back down. The good news is that the governor has put out a budget. He put just before the election in November. The governor it's the first step in the budget process for the 2021-2022 year, and he restored the funding so that the negative factor, the BS factor, would be $572 million again. Unfortunately, that only is using one-time dollars. And so while that is great news for the 21-22 budget year, there's a cliff the next year. And as a matter of fact, what we found after the last huge recession was that the worst years for school funding are 3 and 4 years out from the recession, after the federal stimulus dollars disappear, et cetera. And so we have this bridge of some tools that are available, like what Proposition EE allows, but it's going to be a difficult year. It's going to be a very difficult budget year. The December forecast will tell us more. This recent spike in COVID is worrying. And it may be that what came in as a more positive funding expectations in September might go south again. And so what the governor has proposed may or may not be even possible. And the JBC, of course, the Joint Budget Committee, has to take into account everything else, rising Medicaid costs, rising unemployment costs. And so that's what's ahead. As I keep mentioning, there are some tools that are available to the legislature. And over the years, many of you who have come to the Capitol with us can probably remember when you went to legislators 2, 3, 4 years ago and said, you've got to spend more on schools. They said, we would love to, but our hands are tied. And that was generally true, although the legislature can always refer a ballot measure, but their hands are tied. And you know, Proposition 117 ties their hands again in a different way. But there are some things that are available, and I won't go into the details of this. We'll be talking more about this as we roll out our legislative agenda. But property tax levers, last year, the School Finance Act put in place some mechanisms to increase local support for schools in ways that will start reversing some real incredible inequities that the combination, all the budget rules in our Constitution created. And so there is a lever there. The governor, this goes back to the question about Governor Polis's tacit support, or at least non-opposition to 116. When he wanted to do a tax cut, he wanted it to be revenue neutral. And the legislature has the ability to close some tax loopholes that hopefully will be done in ways to make the system more fair, but that would increase revenues and make it possible to chip away at that BS factor and fund other things. And of course, they can always refer measures. I know that there's at least, I saw Representative McLaughlin was on, and there's other legislators on. I do want to give you a minute to weigh in on this as well. You don't have to, but we welcome you.
Hi, this is Barbara. I could show my video, I guess, and be polite about all this. So here I go. There I am. Yeah, thank you very much for doing this. There's just so much we don't know right now. I think I'm still trying to gather why people passed 116 and figure out that, because they're for education, but they don't mind taking a whole bunch of money out of our budget. And I haven't quite figured out what our voters in Colorado are thinking. We are just getting started looking at what we can do. I think, Lisa, we've been talking to you with Shannon about, Representative Byrd, about forming some discussion groups that only focus on public education, because I think we need to brainstorm what we can do. We can do something, and nobody is saying they hate education. They just don't want to fund it. So we need to figure out how you can love education and fund it. And I'm hoping that we have a really good team of people here that we can all work together and get this going. Everything you've listed on this page is exactly correct. I think we have so many new people in Colorado that have no idea that a BS factor even exists, or that Tabor even exists. And it's really hard to explain to new people why we can't fund education, and or why we don't fund education. I hate to say can't here, but we don't fund education nearly what it should be. And we've borrowed money from them, and nobody really knows where that money came from. And it was so long ago. People kind of conveniently forgot about it. So, but I look forward to working with everyone as a team and to make this happen and be really creative and take out what we can, add what we can. And I'm hoping that we can all work together. Representative Snyder is also online here today, so maybe he can join us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Representative McLaughlin. Representative Snyder, would you like to say anything? We understand if you wouldn't. It's sort of a sad.
Well, no, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity. It's never a great idea to follow Barbara McLaughlin because she is so much more engaged than I am. So are you hearing me right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it is a lot of moving pieces right now. During this pandemic, we have been pretty much led by Governor Polis, and by and large, he has done a fabulous job. I would have liked to have had a debate about the BS factor and how we could have maybe prioritized. Our plan was then to reduce that. We didn't get there this year. I'm hoping we can in the future. I think it's going to take a while to figure out everything from the Gallagher repeal to 116 and some of the tax consequences there. But I just want you to know that I can only speak for myself, but I know there's a large presence in the legislature that realizes we need to fund our education, specifically K-12. And I know we've done a lot of great things from all-day kindergarten to pre-K now, but we cannot ignore the bread and butter issue of funding our schools at a proper level. So consider me an ally, and I look forward to learning more as this session nears its beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Snyder. And we will, I appreciate Representative McLaughlin mentioning this third bullet. We need to engage our legislators, and we were saying stay tuned and connected because we are working on structures for figuring out how to really have good conversations and take that whole coalition of folks in the legislature that Representative Snyder just mentioned and focus on solutions in addition to just how the COVID is impacting and bring as much information to the legislators, really support you all in your deliberations. So we're looking forward to that, and I hope you all will stay tuned and be a part of our engagement with legislators in the coming year. And I would say not just this session, but we really want to create a conversation that continues through the off season, and so that we can really be building policies together and that will have the grassroots support necessary to do what everybody's talked about, get people to pay for the education that they really do care about, public education. If there are no other questions about that, I'm just going to quickly talk about the fact that we will never stop looking to the ballot, because ultimately we cannot fully fund an adequate, equitable system of public education in the state without getting the voters to say yes. And so Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition, which, as I said, is the group that brought Amendment 73, that has the practitioners case, CASB school boards cases, the executive, CEA, AFT, the Federation of Teachers, rural schools, but also the NAACP and the Council of Churches and the Colorado Association of Bilingual Educators, just a broad coalition. We are right now, we continue to meet every month, and we have policy meetings in between where we're trying to figure out what to do next, and actually filing something and getting some more information about what we can put on the ballot and what kind of funding can come as a result of that, and to frankly to keep the conversation moving, to keep a concrete message that our schools need better funding. I will quote Charlotte Chancho, who is the superintendent of Mapleton schools, who kept putting mill levy overrides on the ballot and kept losing. And people said to her, when are you going to stop putting it on the ballot? And she said, when you pass it. And they did eventually. So we'll keep working on it. We're going to continue building the knowledge and the networks and the relationship, the grassroots muscle, so that there is a whole movement ready to build upon what we did with 271 and 73. We know that we're in better shape now than we were a year ago, and we're in better shape to do to do our work on Amendment B, et cetera, because of the work we did with 73. So you are a part of that. I see such great friends as I look at who's participating today. And that's what we'll be working toward. And it's possible if we have really work on conversations and understanding with legislators that we can get to a place where the legislature can refer it, because as we know with Amendment B and Proposition EE, that can be very successful, especially and really only if there is already that infrastructure of support ready to take it to a success on the ballot. So I think that's it. Are there any questions out there that? Okay, so back to Ben, I believe. How to get involved.
Hello again, everyone. So I mentioned briefly earlier our public education voter app, which some of our activists used this election cycle. We also had a version of it that was just online during Prop CC back in 2019. But this has been an immensely helpful way that we can both contact our volunteers and have our volunteers contact the people around them to spread the word about what we're doing and what we're standing up for. So this is for iPhones, so iOS, and you can also download it on Google if you have an Android. And you simply go and search, I think, Betsy, is it Be a Public Education Voter?
Just public education voter,
Just public education voter. And the app should pop up. The logo looks like that little white logo on the right-hand image, just in the center there with the check mark that says, I am a public education voter. We don't know quite how we're going to utilize this yet going forward, but we do know that this is going to be an integral part of our advocacy and a really important part of our volunteer effort. So if you want to go ahead and go to the App Store, go to iTunes or whatever and download this, that would be great. And we will be in touch via email in the coming weeks about ways that we're going to use this during the legislative session.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, this is just a really easy way. I know a lot of us are glued to our phones a lot of the time. So, if you want to be an advocate and you are checking your phone, and we'll send you a push notification that says, hey, a new action is ready for this week. And it's really easy to take it. So we're excited about it. We have our own app now. We're really moving into the 21st century here at Great Ed. Okay, so I wanted to just wrap up. We've got about 8 minutes left here. If there aren't any questions, we'll give you 8 minutes of your life back. But if you do have any further questions, you are welcome to reach out to Lisa or Ben via email, or feel free to throw any questions that you have into the chat right now, and we can go ahead and answer them here.
So we have one from Alicia. She says, sorry, I missed it. Do we know when the special session is happening?
Representative McLaughlin or Snyder, do you have a time yet?
We think it's going to be right after Thanksgiving. So we don't know, it'll be a 3 or 4 day, but we're not sure which 3 or which 4, or we don't know if it's going to be some remote, if we can do it, or in person. So we just know a very general outline of it as well.
Yeah, we're usually the last to know, so.
We're asking you, if you hear anything, let us know.
Perfect. Thank you both. Any other questions? We really appreciate everyone jumping on tonight and just not only volunteering with us and getting us to the point where all of this work is able to be done, but just sticking with us through every season, whether it be legislative or electoral. We're really excited to have so many engaged volunteers, have so many engaged representatives and senators and other elected officials that are engaging in this work. We're really, really excited about it. And unless there are any other questions, I will go ahead and let everyone go.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you very much.